Welcome back to the Jessica Ash Wellness YouTube channel, coming to you with another episode of the Fully Nourished Podcast. I'm Jessica Ash, functional nutritionist and integrative health coach, and this podcast is really a place to explore where female physiology and feminine energy dance together to shape our life experience. We take a scientific and spiritual look at why we as women are so deeply burned out, almost on a soul level, and also explore the real physiological consequences and social consequences behind that burnout. I want to explore together what it looks like to reclaim our feminine radiance and become deeply and fully nourished. With that being said, as a reminder, everything in this podcast is for education and inspiration only and is not intended as medical advice. Please talk to the appropriate professional if necessary, and please also use common sense before making any changes to your diet or lifestyle. Can I just say it feels so good to be back recording. I'm so happy. I have been working on getting some really incredible guests on for you this season. I feel like a lot of the podcasts in the health space are just kind of echo chambers where everyone's having similar people on and kind of talking about the same things all the time. And I don't want to do that to you. I don't want to just create content to just create content. So I have been really intentional about looking at your questions and your feedback this past season and trying to get your questions answered and trying to guide you in the direction you're asking to be guided into. But today's episode is just kind of a hodgepodge of things, my thoughts, some funny stuff, just things I found funny, what I've been up to since you last heard from me, just stuff like that. And then next week, we're going to dive in with one of my favorite interviews of the season. So stick around if you want to hear me just chatter away. But it's been so interesting to watch how the health community has been shifting so much, even recently. I feel like the past 2 years, I've kind of sat back, as you guys lovingly call it, in my hermit chapter. But so much more has been going on behind the scenes. I have been transforming and changing as a person and really learning the wisdom that comes with the creative process. And for anyone that is an artist or a creator or just loves what they do, regardless of what it is, that creative process is kind of rocky and up and down. Like if you are really creating from scratch or you're in this co-creative energy that I talk about a lot, which can apply to fertility and actually bringing children into the world, like going through the birth process. But to me, the creative process is very similar to the birth process in the sense that you have to kind of take in a lot of energy, then you kind of gestate that energy, you transform it, and you then finally kind of birth it to life, which comes with its own intensity. I don't want to say pain, although sometimes the intensity is painful, but you kind of have to expand or break, right? That's kind of the gist of it. But going back to how the health space has changed so much in the past couple of years, it's just like you can really feel the collective of women shifting, right? And we went over some fundamentals and foundationals in the past season so that as we move forward, we kind of have a foundation laid or an understanding laid of bioenergetics and how energetics and feminine physiology and nourishment and intentionality and mindfulness, all of this kind of works together to really, in my opinion, move society forward. Women have a wisdom and a connection to the divine that just can't be explained. It's almost like we are increasingly sensitive, and the sensitivity really allows us to be connected to something beyond ourselves, something that we can't quite put our finger on or can't quite explain. And we're so sensitive to the energetic shifts of the collective or all the people around us or in our atmosphere or in our consciousness that whether we recognize it or not, we tend to all start moving in a direction together. That is like our communalness, right? We are such community-oriented beings, and we don't really operate in a vacuum. Like we all interact with each other and are constantly operating in a relationally. and beyond, like energetically, really, when it comes down to it. And so there is this collective shifting. When I started in the health space, at least posting publicly, there was something very needed in the health space that was different than what's needed now. At the time, everybody was just restricting, and just so afraid of food and so afraid of everything. And in a way, nourishment and the idea of becoming fully nourished and the idea of nourishing the female body, making sure we're eating enough calories, making sure we have a good appetite, really paying attention to those metabolic markers or metabolic messages, brought so much healing and so much light to many of our lives. But then for some of us, we took those old patterns and we created more restriction, and we created more fear and more shame and more guilt. And that kind of meshing with everything that's going on with social, our increasingly high use of social media and our constant consumption and access to more and more and more information, has kind of accumulated into this storm of just, it feels like chaos. It feels like madness. It feels like I don't know what to trust. I don't know which direction to go in. I'm paralyzed. I'm crippled. People tell me to lower my stress. People tell me to find my balance. People tell me to be in my feminine energy. People tell me to do my own research. People tell me to listen to my body. And I am so paralyzed. None of those things are, I'm capable of none of those things. Like, all of those things feel absolutely impossible to where I'm at right now. And so I kind of see what's going on, and I've been seeing what has been going on for a while now. But I don't necessarily think, and I didn't necessarily think throwing more information at the problem was the way to go about it. And so it's taken me quite some time. And in that time, I've had to really learn to just kind of trust in divine timing and trust that all of the timing will work out exactly how it's supposed to, because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do about it yet. I wasn't quite sure if I just wanted to kind of keep going as I was going, or kind of just keep trying to kind of fight against the cog of the machine, or if I wanted to step back and kind of just observe for a while. And that's what I've been doing, is just kind of observing the shifts that have been taking place, and really the needs of the collective, the needs of women for quite some time. I didn't think it was going to be so long, but my own body kind of forced me. It came at the perfect time where I was creatively burned out and physically burned out, which sometimes for most of us, especially people that are creators or truly creative, are kind of constantly creating from a place of originality, where you are being very intentional about being connected with your creator or your source, and you're kind of constantly pulling the intangible, these ideas, right? You're pulling the intangible and you're trying to figure out how to make it tangible, which is a birth process, right? In a sense, we do the same thing with humans. We take a soul, we take something spiritual that doesn't have a material form, and then we actually put it into material form with our own bodies. It's pretty badass. But we're doing that in more ways than just birth, right? And it's funny because, I don't know, I feel like women, we resent our sacredness and our set apartness so much. At least a lot of women do. And that's my hope with this podcast and with my work, is to start to really recognize our set apartness, own it, say, like, my biological rhythms and needs and patterns are completely different than yours. I don't resent it. I own it. I think it's beautiful, this responsibility that I have to kind of bring heaven down to earth in a way, to take things that are in the spiritual form and make them tangible. It's almost, the womb is a portal, but it's a physical representation of our power and what we are capable of doing. Our feminine vision, as I like to call it, which I will talk a lot about in my upcoming new work. But for women who are not open to that yet, or haven't gotten to that point, which I totally understand, we still kind of resent our perceived limits. We have been brainwashed. I'm going to go ahead and use the right word. We've been propagandized, brainwashed into believing that we are limited, and that if we don't want to be limited, then we need to operate like someone with different physiology than us, right? Male physiology. And we have to be defined by our output, and we have to be defined by our tasks and our accomplishments and our, what we do. And I can totally see how we could become very resentful of that. If that's the way that you viewed yourself and you viewed the world, that you never quite were enough because you never produced enough. I mean, for the female physiology and for feminine energy, what is created in its due time. Divine timing is a huge part of that. And if we want to take part in that co-creative work, we really do need to start to recognize that the fruits of our labor, or the accomplishments that come from our labor, are really just the cherry on top of things. But for female physiology, how the action of bringing something into fruition feels is everything. As one of our guests this season will say, it's the texture behind the doing, or the feeling behind the doing. It's the texture underlying all of life. And part of our problem right now with what's going on, with social media and beyond, we are so obsessed with consumption that there's so much consumption going on that there's just creation to create, right? It's not a intentional act of meeting with your creator, meeting with your source, and actually thoughtfully and intentionally bringing that thing into fruition and turning that intangibility into something tangible. But it's instead just like, what can I create today? Like, I've got the time. Like, I'm going to just create something to just create. And you're just kind of putting out this junk creativity. Or what I should say, it's not even really creativity. It's just kind of junk food for people to consume, junk information for people to consume. And so I see it as, if we don't take back the sacredness of the creative process, the co-creative process, whatever that is for you at this time in your life. All women are co-creating all of the time, no matter what season of your life you're in. We really need to bring back the sacredness of the creative process and stop seeing the fruit of the labor as the only important thing. The intentionality and the feeling behind what you're creating is just as important and is going to impact the end result. And that goes for pregnancy, right? That goes for motherhood, but that also will roll down into many different aspects of our lives. But what I've learned is that to this process, there needs to be a huge amount of surrender, right? There has to be a huge amount of trust, or it just doesn't work. It won't work. And you're going to constantly wear the burden on your shoulders and feel the pressure constantly. And that's just no way to create. That's really what when we're actually talking about stress, and we're talking about this idea of, a low energy state or hypometabolic, we're really talking about this idea that at any given time, we're expending more resources than we are intaking. Or we're intaking more resources than we're expending. It goes both ways, right? That's what energetic equilibrium is about, or energetic balance. But how we actually approach the process and the spirit in which we show up in, and our thoughts around it and our belief systems around it, really are going to impact the experience. And so I've had to really learn that sometimes you just really have to trust the process, and you need to just know that if it's not coming to you yet, or it's not time yet, it can be frustrating at times. But what I've learned is you can't rush genius. And I mean that, I'm saying it that way so that every single one of you who feel like you're behind, or you feel like you're not quite ready yet, but you feel like you need to do something because, you kind of sometimes get into that competition mindset, that kind of masculine energy of, I need to compete, and there's not this kind of communal collective of everybody doing this rhythmic harmonization, this dance that is working together to kind of further this work. I just want you to hear that, because it's important. You cannot rush every single puzzle piece to just fall into place. It doesn't work that way. And when you take a step back and surrender, which is a huge part of my new work, and how to do that, like, what does that actually look like, and what does that actually mean? Oh my gosh, it is a piece that just surpasses anything that you have ever experienced. But what I have also recognized is that if you don't take responsibility for that process and you don't learn about your own nature, right? You don't learn how to speak the language of your body and meet your body where it is at and learn how to meet its basic biological needs. It's so difficult to be in tune with all of that. It's so difficult to be surrendered. It's so difficult to be at peace. And because you don't quite understand your own power, of course you're going to resent it, right? If you're a powerful person, there's great responsibility in that power, right? As females, we do need to understand that whether we admit that we are wielding power over the people around us or not, we are. And there is great personal responsibility in that. And I think a lot of the resentment that I see on social media and just comments, Reddit, whatever, within the media, there feels to be this overwhelming sense of resentment of the female experience that I hear coming out of females' own mouths. Women's own mouths are really exposing what a lot of women are feeling as a collective, which is just burnout, resentment, utter soul deep exhaustion. But a lot of that actually comes from our own denial of our own power. We are sensitive. We need to live within different biological rhythms as men. Certain things, although we can do them, we don't recognize that just because we can doesn't mean it's not going to come with a lot of consequences. And so if we're not intentional about how we show up to things, or we just kind of put the same expectations that we have for male physiology on female physiology, we're always going to be tired. We're always going to be exhausted. We're always going to be super burned out, not just physically, but also just mentally and spiritually. Life is going to seem somewhat gray, even though it should be vivid in millions of facets of color. And so what a lot of women are experiencing right now is that they are neglecting their own power or ignoring it or denying it. And in doing that, there is discomfort. There's pain. And instead of facing the pain for what it is, facing the discomfort for what it is, we end up actually just trying to rescue ourselves from the pain in any way we possibly can, right? For some of us, it's like chasing after our health. For some of us, it's diving into religion, getting super extremist and thinking in terms of black and white and just kind of falling for authoritarian extremist thinking. For some of us, it's just completely avoiding conflict at all costs, or just kind of going through life, going through the motions. But at the end of the day, what's kind of underlying all of that is just denial of our own biological needs, living within our biologically appropriate rhythms. But I do see the collective of women kind of shifting and waking up and recognizing that I can't go on this way. There's just no way that I can keep going on this way. I have to do something differently. And that is what I mean by I say, I definitely feel a shift within the collective. And as women, the first step to when we start to wake up, I guess, however you want to apply that, that can be applied in many different ways. And I'm sure you're all going to take it very differently. But when we start to wake up to anything, right, spiritually, or we become more aware of something, as we begin to become more aware and we start to wake up, the first thing that's pretty likely to experience or to come to fruition is rage, is anger, is kind of this vitriol almost. There is an underlying tone of rage. And in a society that has kind of trained women that emotions and feelings, I don't know. I feel like in different spaces, emotions and feelings are seen different ways. And then a lot of us just never learned how to express our emotions in a really appropriate way, or our feelings. We became really disconnected from our feelings. I know for me, in the environment I grew up in, it became this thing where I constantly needed to manipulate myself, because you have to kind of manipulate yourself to appear a certain way outwardly, right? there's a lot of meanings attached to things if you're expressing them in the wrong way, right? So you kind of learn to almost tiptoe around how things become expressed at your own self, right? You kind of shove down your own feelings and your own emotions, and you just kind of learn to disassociate from them or disembody from them and disconnect from them altogether until you could be feeling something and you don't even recognize you're feeling it. You're just reacting to the feeling and you're behaving in a way that is a reaction to that feeling, but the feeling or the emotion itself is just absolutely out of your complete awareness. And so I know for me, I'm kind of on, I would say like year 10 or 11 of a spiritual journey or awakening and an exploration of who I really am and where I really come from and all the things that are so important for us to explore as human beings. And what I've learned is kind of the first thing that starts to come out is this rage and this emotion. And I think a lot of times we can actually start to blame other people. I see this a lot in the social climate where we as women, we have kind of convinced ourselves that we're a victim of something else, like someone made us feel a certain way, and so therefore it's their problem. But actually, our feelings and our emotions are our choice. You know, how we respond to somebody's behavior or how they speak to us or something that they say to us or something that they do that has nothing to pertain to us at all is actually our choice. And so when you start to wake up to your power and your own personal responsibility, you start to really see how many places you are violating your own boundaries, meaning that boundaries to me, all that means, and I talk about this in another episode, we actually talk about boundaries and what boundaries mean to me. But boundaries mean to me that, you know where you end and somebody else begins, right? Your boundary is your property line. And it's important to defend your property line, or somebody else is going to start building their property on your property, right? But there's a difference between defending your property line and going and knocking on your neighbor's door because they're building something on their property and it's really making you very angry or irritated, right? And I see it kind of the same way, where women right now have this kind of misplaced feminine rage where they are allowing people to build homes on their property. And then once it gets to be too much, they're mad at the person for building the home on the property when they never protected their property line to begin with. And so a lot of us are waking up to the fact that, I never defended my own property line. I never really took care of my own biological needs. I never, I let too much go. I started working a job that is absolutely soul sucking and I don't know what to do with my life now, whatever it might be. We don't need to really blame anyone. We don't need to blame somebody else, but we also don't need to blame ourselves. We need to recognize that we're not victims of these things. We have a lot of power, and no problem is too big that we can't solve it, especially when we're connected to the creator of all things. And so all of this feminine rage that you're seeing, when you're seeing women just get so triggered and they're so angry and they constantly lash out at women that make them feel, women that are creating and putting really important information out there, and they're getting a lot of this like lashback from women that feel like they're being blamed about something or a victim of something. Just a reminder that this feminine rage is good because what they're starting to feel is a violation of their own boundaries, either by somebody else or themselves. And that's really the first step. We have to start to feel. We have to start to shift our awareness and start to recognize our own personal responsibility. And so the reason everything seems so chaotic, at least to me, is because women are desperately hanging on to what's no longer working for them. But they're also trying to feel all of this rage just bubble up. And feminine rage is a scary thing, especially if it's coming from a whole collective. There's this whole collective kind of rising up in this feeling. It's going to be like a little bit of a bumpy road for a little while. But I don't know why I was talking about all that. That was kind of a tangent about feminine rage, but more just like it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to start to like really feel that rage because it means that you're waking up and you're taking some of your sovereignty back. When you start to recognize your own personal responsibility, you start to move through the feelings of victimhood, you begin to, well, take your power back a little bit. And so I think when any time anything's shifting, any place is shifting, any niche is shifting, any circle of people is shifting, it does feel a little awkward and a little bumpy. And I'm starting to see a lot of women coming out and starting to talk about, feminine energy and the feminine experience and femininity and divine femininity, and woo-woo femininity. And then we kind of have this other group of people that's like, that's not something that we want to acknowledge at all. Like, let's keep it physiological. Let's just focus on the physiology of it. And I think there has to be room for both, to be honest. I think that there's going to be a lot of people that get it wrong along the way if they don't really focus on where female physiology and feminine energy marry together, because that's really where we can find a lot of answers about ourselves and really our purpose in this world. Because right now we're being thrown so much messaging over like what your purpose is in this world. And, on one side you have kind of this like, I don't know, this radical feminine collective, or I should say radical feminist collective that is very much like, you can do anything you want, sky is the limit. There's kind of no order, no structure to it, and no really taking into account like women's biological patterns and needs. Also not talking about yes, women can do anything they want. However, can doesn't always mean should, or can doesn't always mean want to. And we also have to weigh the true physiological consequences of doing that thing. And, can we show up in a way that's not going to deteriorate our physiology? That's really the question to me. It's not like, oh, is it too stressful or is it not stressful? Or is it too hard on the body or not hard on the body? That's not how I look at it. It's more of, am I willing to pay the cost or the consequences of not showing up, not being able to show up every day in the energy that I need to feel good? Certain women can show up to very kind of masculine schedules or masculine jobs or masculine careers and still stay in their feminine energy. It's rare, but there are women out there that are really resilient and are really good at kind of honing and practicing, continuing that vortex of well-being, as one of my mentors calls it, of feminine energy. But then on the flip side, we also have, so we have one kind of group trying to define what, the feminine experience needs to look like. And then we have a kind of a completely another group that's getting super popular. I don't necessarily like to call it like the trad wife movement, but it's more of like, quote unquote, traditional values, conservative traditional values. And I think there's definitely some great pieces to kind of take from both camps. But what you have to recognize about this is you can show up in just as much of a masculine energy as a stay-at-home mom as you can while working a really corporate 9-to-5, right? Like the actions and the tasks themselves don't actually matter much when it comes to true acknowledgement of female physiology and feminine energy. It does not really matter if you wear a suit or a really like feminine frilly dress while doing things. That does not define femininity. That does not define feminine energy either. You could have a brood of 8 children and still be extremely controlling and still be extremely restrictive and authoritative and trying to control everything around you in your environment and your children's lives and your home, and suck the life right out of that too, right? So, and have the life feel like it's been sucked out of your body, to kind of remove all goodness and beauty and truth from that ritual or routine at home too. So there's 2 kind of blaring camps. And then there's kind of like I shouldn't say 2, there's 3 to me. And then there's kind of like the woo-woo, like primal, wild feminine, where we have like we're very primal and wild, and we're like naked in nature with like dirt rubbed all over our bodies, and like, we're kind of, we're pouring our menstrual blood at the root of the trees, and there's kind of these like 3 camps. And I think a lot of us women who, when we interact with information from all three extreme camps, is what I like to call them, we, at least for me, there's always a little bit of like a, I don't know, this doesn't quite feel right. Like, this does not really define me. This is not who I am. But should I fit myself into this box? Like, should I try? Like, maybe I'm just not super feminine. Like, maybe I need to be more feminine. You know, we kind of start to have these thoughts about ourselves where it's like, well, I don't bake sourdough and I don't wear frilly dresses and I don't, I don't necessarily like, bake up a storm and cook all my family meals from scratch every moment of every day. And I don't maybe want to like milk a cow every day. And then there's like, the other camp where it's like, maybe I don't want to work a really like high powered career and be the CEO and not have children until I'm 45. And, this kind of push for just the masculine hustle and you'll never be satisfied if you don't have a career. Like, maybe that doesn't feel right either to you. But then on the flip side, you're like, so does that mean that I have to just like be this like woo sacred spiritual woman who talks like she is in slow motion and everything is just so incredibly amazing all of the time, and oh, it feels so good to be in my feminine energy? Like, that feels kind of weird too. And I want to just let you know that I find it all it doesn't resonate quite well with me either, because at the end of the day, if the more that we try to define femininity and turn it into an action where we say, do this to be more feminine. I love the new videos that are like 10 micro habits to be more feminine or to be in your feminine energy. And it's like, sway your hips and like, have old money energy, and it's so ridiculously funny. But that's what happens when we try to when the collective starts to shift and everyone's kind of confused and hasn't quite created any type of I don't know, real deep or true understanding of something. People are going to try, right? They're going to try to define it. They're going to try to bullet point it. They're going to try to number it. And it's going to make it increasingly confusing for you, because here you are really trying to define what it means to be within energetic equilibrium, as I like to call it, both on the physical side, the female physiology side, but also on the feminine energy side, on the more energetic, intangible side of it as well. At the end of the day, I feel like all three of these camps kind of sometimes miss out on certain aspects of the feminine. I feel like there is a inherent kind of denial, in a way, of true feminine power, what it actually means, and how it actually expresses. It doesn't look like something specific, right? It doesn't look like a specific type of life. It doesn't look like a specific type of career. It doesn't even look like a specific type of woman, as we would try to it doesn't try to fit itself in a box. Let's put it that way. The minute the feminine becomes completely understood, it actually no longer is the feminine anymore, because the feminine is really the underlying feeling or the energetic imprint or blueprint behind the action or behind the doing. And until we accept all of ourselves and understand that there's nothing that we have to do or show up to do to just be who we are, is the minute that we kind of break free and start to flow, which is one of the pillars of feminine energetics, this kind of new concept that I'm teaching. Flow is one of the most important parts of our nature, or our needs to stay within energetic equilibrium. Females have this incredible capacity to continue to expand, to transform and expand, to alchemize pain, transform it and expand. And to continue, there's this process of, it's that life, death, rebirth cycle where we're constantly kind of dying to ourselves or dying to who we are right now and kind of leveling up almost. There's a transformation process that takes place, and then we've expanded and we can no longer fit ourselves into the previous box. The box is blown open and now we're in a new box. And then our job is to allow our source or the universe or our creator or God to lead us to the edges of our box, our new box, and then we blast it open in a painful process, and then we expand again, and then we can no longer fit in the box that we did before. And so many women deny this part of their experience, which is legitimately the feminine experience, the female experience, that they're trying to constantly, they want to expand. That is the desire. That is a biological need to co-create, right? You have to do it. It's your biological drive. It's that deep, unsatiated hunger that we talk about. You want expansion because you need it. It's a part of you, right? And you want it, but then when you get it, it's so uncomfortable. There's so much discomfort involved that instead of just facing your pain head on and saying, I know this is uncomfortable right now, but I'm going to make it through, and I'm going to be so much better on the other side. Like for me, whenever it gets painful or rocky, I know life is about to get real interesting, and I'm just like, bring it on, mama. Like it is, it's like a very like painful and yet exhilarating experience. But then what I see is a lot of women in a desperate attempt to try to next level because their body is just like calling, please, like I need to get out of this box. They blast out of the box, and then they get so scared because now it's a new reality, right? They have to practice that surrender. They have to practice that trust that unfortunately they try to like spend all their energy trying to shove themselves back into that box instead of just saying like, whew, I'm out of that box now. Like it's time for me to expand in this new box. Like there's nothing scary here. It's going to be okay. And so because we try to see so many things within such a masculine framework, it's so difficult for us as women to really understand this process. It's a much more intangible process. It's an intangible feeling. It's an intangible kind of rhythmic flow that we can't quite explain in bullet points. And so it can become kind of hard or difficult for us to be okay with trusting it because we've been taught to be so cognitive and so cerebral about everything all of the time, which is not where we thrive at. So I know this was quite the rant about some random topics, feminine rage, the idea of co-creative energy and what that actually means, and female expansion. But I just want to encourage you. To me, this is more of an encouragement of, I know things are feeling really chaotic for a lot of us right now. Like we're all just kind of going through it. And I kind of did this work a couple of years ago. I feel like I had to go through that in order to really feed and fuel my work now, like what I feel really called to focus on and called to do moving forward in this kind of new phase of Just Gosh Wellness. And I'm not going to lie to you and say it's not a rocky ride, because facing yourself, facing the deepest part of yourself is extremely hard. It's a super difficult process to take personal responsibility and face the hard parts and the things that we've been through and our experiences and our traumas, and to take all of that and alchemize it, right? That's what really you're doing when you're going through it. It's because you're blasting through that box. You are pulling down from the ether, right? You're literally downloading what you need to download so that you can co-create. You can actually pour that out in some capacity at some point in time. And there's no defining what that process looks like for somebody. And being in your feminine energy is really just being, I don't necessarily want to say comfortable in this process, because comfort is not the right word. There's a lot of discomfort within the process. It's like learning to be comfortable in face of discomfort, like learning to feel everything you need to feel to go through this process, and almost welcoming it, like starting to realize that that is part of our identity. That is part of who we are. It's part of our life process. We don't have to talk bad about it. We don't have to deny it. We don't have to resent it. We don't have to shame it. We don't have to feel guilty about it. We don't have to say sorry for it. Like it's just a part of who we are, and how each one of us expresses this energy is going to look different based on our personality, based on our giftings, based on our life experiences, based on our family, those generational curses that we talked about in last season. There's a lot of things that we have to work through to peel back these layers to become who we really are and to feel comfortable, and not only comfortable, but confident, and not only just confident, but sovereign, like almost like queens within who we really are, like to kind of rule our queendom, whether that be our home or our work or our community or whatever it might be, in a way that is wise and thoughtful and understanding, and to truly step into what the feminine calling really is, which is simply nurturance. And I don't just mean nurturing children, I mean nurturing society in a specific direction. Because it starts at home. It starts when you bring life into the world. That is the moment it begins. It is not the moment where it ends. It's the moment that this sovereign nurturance begins, where you have the power and the capacity to literally shape the energy of your home, to shape your children. And I shouldn't even say shape them, but to bring their fruits to life. We all have individual fruits and giftings and really parts to play, like roles within the universe. And many of us have strayed so far from those callings because of all of the layers that were put on us, right? From everybody kind of shaping what they believed about life and shaping us in that same way. It's an unintentional way of treating children. But as we start to really begin to see that childhood is sacred and motherhood is super sacred, but also, I don't have children right now, and I still see my part and my place in this co-creative, nurturing, mothering energy. No matter if you have children or not, it doesn't take away from your feminine calling. It doesn't take away from that energy and how we're supposed to carry ourselves as women. So really, at the end of the day, it's not about what we wear when we show up to it. It's not about what we're showing up to. And it's not about fitting into a specific box. In fact, to me, the term trad woman or traditional woman is kind of an oxymoron, because women have never been upholders of tradition. We have always been the pushers of, towing the line. We've had to, in many ways, because we feel something that others can't quite feel, whether that be women who are just not quite awake to their own feminine power, their sensitivity, or men, right? Like men meet with the divine in a completely different way than we do. We have a unique connection to the world around us. So feminine energy is really about none of those things. It's about actually becoming aware of our true reality, who we are, what we channel, really, if we want to use that word, the type of energy that our physiology channels. And once we have an awareness there, and once we know how to meet those biological needs and speak the language of our body, the sky is truly the limit. So thank you for listening to the Fully Nourished Podcast today, and I will see you next week. If you're looking for any of the links or resources discussed today, they are included in the show notes, which are linked in the description box below. And if you enjoyed this episode and want to support the podcast, please share about it with others, share about it on social media, or even like this video and subscribe to the channel. I really rely on amazing women like you to spread the word about the podcast. So I also really value your ideas and your thoughts and your questions. So if you have any topics you'd like to be discussed, or any questions you'd like answered, or guests you'd like me to bring on, please go to jessicaashwellness.com/podcast to share those with me. And if you want more content or want to stay in the loop about new episode drops, follow me on Instagram at jessicaashwellness and sign up for my Sunday email list at jessicaashwellness.com/email-subscribe. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you soon.